Hey there, my friends. I'm Stan Gray, and welcome to my show here, TRQ, The Right Questions, where my main goal right now is to get people asking questions about their Christian faith. I was brought up a Christian. I was able to wrestle myself out of that mental slave mentality that Christians tend to develop over time, especially when you're kind of born into the religion. And today, we're going to look at this video from Frank Turek. It's an interesting question, one of the most interesting and consequential questions that I came across during my years-long deconstruction process, about maybe 10 or 12 years ago at this point. The initial question is, why would God create Satan? You're going to hear Frank Turek, a very famous apologist. He's going to give his response to this, and then we're going to watch it piece by piece and kind of pick apart that response, because I have a lot of problems with what he says here. And I've noticed that he sort of dances around several of the real serious questions, logical problems, and conundrums that the Christian has to face. And really, it's not very helpful if you're going to dodge that type of stuff. So let's look at the video, and then we'll get back into it.
If God is all-knowing, he knew that Satan would rebel before he created him. How was Lucifer not created then to be damned?
You could say the same thing about human beings. Why did God create someone who is an atheist and knew he would be an atheist? In other words, why did God create people he knew would go to hell? This goes to the predestination free will issue. I don't think that because we're predestined that we don't have free will, because knowledge does not imply causation. When God elected to create this universe, he knew Lucifer would sin. He knew we would sin. He knew Billy Graham would be a believer and say Richard Dawkins, the most famous atheist in the world, would not be a believer unless Dawkins repents. We can pray that he will, okay? But Billy Graham freely chose to be a believer, and Richard Dawkins has freely chosen to be an atheist. Just because God knows what's going to happen doesn't mean he's causing it.
Okay, so you heard what he had to say. Let's go back.
God is all-knowing. He knew that Satan would rebel before he created him.
So let's start there. God knowing that Satan would rebel before he created him. If you have this all-knowing, all-powerful God, then the only real option of what to believe is that God intentionally created a being that would go off the rails and rebel, convince millions possibly of other super powerful beings to rebel against God and fall to the earth. That situation in itself is so insanely illogical that a creature that is face to face with the almighty ultimate being of the universe, face to face every single moment of, before time, if that even is a thing, moments before time. These angels have intimate knowledge of the divine creator that in ways that human beings could never even imagine experiencing. And still, somehow, they not only believed that God wasn't enough for them, or God wasn't the right leader for them, but they also believed that they could defeat God in battle, when you would have to imagine they knew full well God could blink them out of existence with a passing thought. There's no logical reason for any angel to think that they had a chance of winning a battle against their own creator. So the fact that God did create these angels in such a way, knowing that they would not only be able to, but for a fact that they would choose to rebel against him and cause a litany of problems down the line, down this timeline that we're living in, it must have been intentional if he knew it was going to happen that way. And he created the world and the universe and the realm of the angels and the heavenly realm in such a way that he knew if he created it this way, this is how it would play out. And we're going to get back into that a little bit more later when we start talking about humans. But right now we're on angels and demons and the devil.
How was Lucifer not created then to be damned?
You could say the same thing about human beings.
And there we go. He's already into it. Let's go.
Why did God create someone who is an atheist and knew he would be an atheist? In other words, why did God create people he knew would go to hell? This goes to the predestination free.
Why would God create people he knew were going to go to hell eventually? There's a specific verse that I'm going to mention later that Frank suspiciously doesn't bring up during this conversation, even though it's extremely relevant. I'm shocked. Like, look at me. I'm really shocked that he didn't bring this up. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, though.
Free will issue. I don't think that because we're predestined that we don't have free will.
Oh, well, he doesn't think that. So I guess, he doesn't think that because we're predestined, that predestination is unavoidable. So in other words, he believes, what he's saying right now must mean that he believes our free will can supersede our predestination, which, it's called predestination, meaning that before you arrived into the mix, your destiny was already determined. Predestination. The result of everything that you do and say and think and believe on earth is predestined. So therefore, what about your free will could possibly matter? What could you do to surprise God, to do something that God wasn't expecting? And let's not get into the fact that God is constantly surprised in the Old Testament, and he's constantly, at least pretends to be clueless about what's going on and what people have done. He acts like he didn't know that Adam and Eve had eaten of the fruit of the forbidden tree. He acts like he doesn't know that Cain is about to eliminate his younger brother. He acts like he doesn't know how many people are decent people in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah before he destroys them. He's constantly pretending not to know things, which is weird because it makes me wonder, where did they get this idea of God being omniscient and all-knowing when in the Bible he's constantly regretting things that he does and acting surprised and shocked to the point where he goes into a violent rage on a regular basis because of things that happen. If you know exactly what's going to happen, how could you become enraged to the point where you would curse your own children generationally for all human history based on something that you set up the pieces on the board and you knew exactly where those pieces were going to move? But when they move there, inevitably, because it was predestined, you're still so pissed off that you curse your children. All of them. Starting with the very first two. It's crazy now that I've removed myself from the tinted view, the romanticization of these Christian worldview concepts. It just looks and feels disgusting to me. Anyway, back to the video.
Because knowledge does not imply causation. When God elected to create this universe, he knew Lucifer would sin.
So he says knowledge does not imply causation. That's true. I agree with that, actually. However, God didn't just know what was going to happen. He didn't just, sit by and let the universe create itself without his involvement, and he just happened to know everything that was going to happen. As Frank said, God elected to create the universe. He actively created every single aspect of this universe, and he created it in a specific way, knowing that everything that happens would happen in exactly that way. So he doesn't just know, he did it. He created it. He set all the pieces in motion. Every single atom, every single subatomic particle, every single piece of dark matter, every gluon, every quark, everything is all set in place piece by piece by this incomprehensible mind of this universal deity. And how someone could say that the way that the universe plays out is not directly caused by the action of this God, it takes a level of mental gymnastics I'm no longer willing to contort myself into. Let's continue.
He knew we would sin. He knew Billy Graham would be a believer and say Richard Dawkins, the most famous atheist in the world, would not be a believer.
Okay, so Billy Graham being a believer, Richard Dawkins not being a believer. God created the universe before the beginning of time. He knew how this was going to play out. So is Frank telling me that because of Richard Dawkins' free will, he had the choice to not be a non-believer? He had the choice to become the world's greatest Christian apologist. But even though God knew from the beginning of time that that would not happen, what about Richard Dawkins' free will would have allowed him to supersede that? It makes no logical sense. If you want this ultra badass, all-powerful God, you have to contend with this problem. This issue is unavoidable in that case, because for him to know everything and us use our free will to supersede that, those are two, it's an oxymoron. It can't happen according to just the logic where this system is based on. It's not possible.
Unless Dawkins repents, we can pray that he will, okay? But Billy Graham freely chose to be a believer, and Richard Dawkins has freely chosen to be an atheist. Just because God knows what's going to happen doesn't mean he's causing it.
Okay, so there's the video again. There's a particular Bible verse that should have been brought up in this conversation, and I'm not quite sure why he didn't. Even though I am sure I know why he didn't, because it would it would exacerbate, it would worsen the position that he's in. You could see how kind of uncomfortable he is talking about this in this way, because it really is a hard question for a Christian to contend with, even a professional apologist like Frank Turek. But I'm going to read this verse for you. It's Romans 9:22. What if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? This is a super major verse, especially in the Calvinism camp, where people do believe, according to biblical logic and teachings, that God is in control of everything. God did decide everything, and certain people are just going to hell. They were made for that specific purpose in order to glorify God and display the wrath of God in creation. And that verse is in the New Testament, and it acknowledges the idea that some people are just vessels of wrath created for the very purpose, prepared for destruction. And it's a depressing thought, and I've met Calvinists that have no problem whatsoever with that concept. They believe, hey, we were always predestined to be saved, and if you leave the faith, that means you were predestined to burn in hell. There are people out there, Christians, who call themselves Christians, who fully accept and acknowledge the fact that if God is indeed all-powerful and all-knowing, and he created everything in a specific way for his own purposes, that there's no avoiding the outcome that God foresaw before the beginning of time. And honestly, that makes more logical sense than what Frank is saying here, that somehow we could use our free will and not be subject to the predestined fate that God foresaw at the beginning of time. And I'm really trying not to put any words in Frank's mouth and add to the understanding of it that he's trying to communicate here. But I feel like it's sort of painting yourself into a logical corner when you say that things can be predestined, but because of our free will, it doesn't mean that God caused the predestined things to happen, even though he is the architect of everything according to this worldview. That's pretty much all I wanted to say about this particular thing that I can think of right now. I'm trying this sort of new format of, it's new for me anyway, reacting to and analyzing, breaking down these short videos so that I can sort of get some of these ideas out into the world from my perspective, things that I've come across during my journey of deconstruction and growing up in the religion to the degree that I did. I was very well studied. I contended with these things, and at a certain point in my life, I just was no longer willing to make the concessions and make the excuses that Frank here is willing to make. And a lot of people make a lot of money. They gain a lot of influence because Christians do struggle with these ideas and with these concepts, and they want to be placated. They want to be told, like, hey, I know it feels weird and I know it seems bad, but it's okay. It's actually not bad. It's actually good. You just got to look at it and bend over this way and then take your right foot and stick it over there, and then you'll see that it actually is a good thing, and it's totally fine because we all agree that God is perfect, and if there's something wrong, it's something wrong with us, not with God. So I'm throwing my 2 cents into the hat in order to try to combat that notion, because to me, in my opinion and in my experience, I've grown to believe that this stuff is all man-made, and it's all in service of some very base human desires. And we'll talk about that type of stuff more as I get along with these videos and making content for this channel. Speaking of which, check out I got about 100 different shorts or something like that I've made. I'm working on making more different types of videos reacting to things like this, or video essays talking about some of the things that I've come across or things that have gone through my mind during my deconstruction. So, hey, if you enjoy this type of content, you like what I have to say, or you've got questions, comments, concerns, reach out to me. Look down in the comments section, like, subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I will, I'm gonna go ahead and let you go for now. And I'll see you back here again soon. So, thank you for watching. If you're all the way here to the end, that's amazing, and you're exactly the type of person I want to be talking to. So, I'm Stan Gray. This has been TRQ, The Right Questions, and remember, if you want to know the truth, you've got to ask the right questions. Take care, my friend.